Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
Amen. Hello. Thank you to everyone who's here with us today. I'm Jacqueline, for those who I have not met. Jacqueline Kane.
Patrick
That's my
Kane.
husband, Patrick. We are locally, we organize the community for the Twin Cities. We're happy to do so. And so today, we're happy you're here. We're happy to start the year on this great feast. I think somehow last year, we were also on the 8th of September, we started our day with the pilgrimage to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so what a gift it is to be, with her today. And we'll talk about this as well, but just the gospel reading we were given today. It's just such a gift for us in the community to bear our name. So we wanted to start the year just to speak to you all about a few things, and then a little bit about our own kind of vision for the year, for the community. So we're going to start first to just say, before I start, we're mapping out the teachings for the year, and so some of the things we'll talk about today, we won't go into a lot of depth because we have heard from many of you as to what kind of you're wanting to learn about for the teachings, and it'll be for the national community, and we're grateful for that response. So some of this will be, maybe you're thinking, oh, you didn't cover enough, but we just wanted to just speak a bit about a few things and then kind of move on also into the vision for the year. So we wanted to start to even just say, why does the community even exist? Why is there the Emmanuel community for us to be participating in? And so we'll start to say what was happening in France at the time that the community was born with Pierre and Martine, and move on from there.
And I think one of the other reasons we wanted to start with the beginning of the Emmanuel community, just kind of where we are with the church, the crisis in the church, because we thought that was a pretty good parallel with the starting of the community. The church in France at the time, in 1971, was in severe decline. Just the attendance, faithfulness of folks that were practicing Catholics was in decline. So we thought there was somewhat of a parallel to kind of go back to that, go back to the basics again, to kind of think a little bit about that in the crisis that we're in right now. So as I mentioned, most of the European church was in decline. In the early 1970s, when the Emmanuel community was more formally founded in France by a layman, Pierre Orsat was his name. So around that time, from 1956, there were 825 priests ordained in France. By 1975, there were 181 priests. So they're just, with that statistic alone, Pierre saw just a real need to foster vocations. So one of the reasons that he founded the community was to foster vocations within the church, to have families that really foster that.
Yeah, because you can imagine that with the lack of priests, and there was also a crisis in the sisters and just vocations to religious life in general. Some statistics say that half of the people who had been attending Mass in countries like France were not anymore. Just education in general for Catholic schools was just really on the decline, and so there was just so much secularism was on the rise, and moral decline. And Pierre saw all this, and it affected him. And we can read, and there's a few books, if you're not familiar with them, on the community that can help us kind of understand the community. And one is Fire and Hope, explains where Pierre came from, the community building. But in this book that we used to reference some of this teaching, I'll quote it was a priest speaking about Pierre, but it says, in all of this, Pierre was very concerned about the crisis the church was undergoing and had no illusions as to its gravity. And because of this, because of the moral decline, so Pierre had worked as a movie critic, basically, and really was an influencer in France for the movies that were coming out, to keep them like morally sound in a way. And he saw that even his position to even evangelize through movies, he couldn't do it anymore. And the industry was really trying to weaken the church's influence, and so he was really a part of all of this, and he saw how it was affecting the whole country. And he said, because of this, he said, and to quote him, he says, "I left to be able to pray." So he left his job as a film critic and just decided he was going to go and kind of be an adorer, really. And it was interesting as we were kind of preparing this, at this moment in Pierre's life, like he had tried so many different things and nothing really took life. And so if that was the end, if he would have just left and really done just that, right, alone to pray, we would not be here today, and the Emmanuel community would have never been formed.
I think from 1935 until 1971, Pierre was somewhat on his own, trying to start something. I mean, that's a long time to try to start something. But finally in 1971 is where that spark began. And it kind of began with a couple different friendships. Pierre was friends with Father Caffarel. Some of you are familiar with Teens of Our Lady that exists here in the Twin Cities as well. So Father Caffarel was a spiritual director to Pierre and a friend. And he also knew Martine Kata, who's a woman who's a co-foundress of the community as well. And at the same time, she was running some just independent prayer groups in Paris. And Father Caffarel kind of brought the two together and said, hey, there may be something that the two of you can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because of, Pierre was introduced to Martine as a great influencer actually in the French world because of his position as a film critic. But Father Caffarel said of him that he was a great influencer, but he left the world, lives in poverty on the 5th floor of an apartment, and he does this so he can adore. So this is who he is. So she had some ideas about him when they finally met, and they decided to kind of go along with these the schools of prayer, which were really just to teach people how to pray, given the lack of formation that was happening in the country, the lack of priests, the lack of vocations. And it was with this, so this is happening, and at the same time, there's the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that happened in Duquesne, here in the United States. And there was a French couple that were there, and when they returned to France, and some of us have heard this before, so we're repeating, but they returned to France, and they were then with Father Caffarel, who had known them, and Martine and Pierre. They came together, and it was this that Martine and Pierre received the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and really knew each other as brothers and sisters, kept along with these prayer groups, decided they didn't want to keep the prayer groups closed any longer, and this was more or less the birth of Emmanuel, to really just places for people to come to seek the Lord and to pray with one another. And that's really
and so from this, Pierre and Martine started, a prayer group. I think there were 5 at the very beginning. At the end of that year, there were 500 in France that were participating in different prayer groups throughout Paris.
Yeah, so we can see in like a really little way, right? What they started was little, but it was so profound and really lived, I would say, devoutly, that it attracted people. People were looking for holiness. They were looking for something that the world was not offering them, and they found it in this very simple way.
So, and I think we'll have a few more teachings, a little bit in more detail about the beginning of the church, but to kind of parallel with, the crisis in the church today. And one of the things we talked about that is interesting, the gospel for today is one of the ones that some of the folks at the very beginning of the founding of the community were meditating on. What should the community be called? And so this is, don't think it's a coincidence that we're meeting today, our first day of this year. And here we hear in the gospel, Jesus is coming, Emmanuel, God with us. And I think Pierre wanted to bring that to the world. He wanted to bring Jesus to the world, that he is truly here, he's present, and the Holy Spirit really dwells within each one of us, and he wanted to bring that to the world. And so, and I think in a little way, the crisis in the church right now, that again, we're called to individual holiness, that Pierre thought at the beginning that it was a way for lay people to sanctify their lives and to grow in holiness, as we're trying to do as members or potential members of the community.
Right. So within the crisis of Pierre and other people, there are other movements that, in France, that were born out of this crisis, and probably the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. But so in the same way, I mean, if we're not there, or if we're not even past what was happening in France, I mean, we're going that way within the state of the church currently. And we recently listened to, a video. I'm going off our script here, but by Bishop Barron, and it's so powerful for him again to call, like, it's not the time to leave, it's the time to kind of dig in and fight, right? And so we can say, well, when we look to the church and we look to the good and holy leaders in the church, like, what are they asking us to do? They're asking us to pray, they're asking us to fast, they're asking us to adore, they're asking us to make, to try to make reparations for the sins of so many, and really to console, for us, I think, really strongly to console the heart of Jesus, and still be able to show people out there who are also understanding what's happening in the church, that there is still great joy to be given in following the Lord. And so this is for us a call to really go deeper, and to be this kind of joy in the world. A couple things with that before we kind of go into how Emmanuel, fits into that. One would be at Mass here, the pastor's Father Umberto, for those of you who might know him. And at the very beginning of the month, when kind of everything was breaking, right? Everything is breaking in the church. I was at daily Mass, and I've been bringing my kids to daily Mass ever since this, because I thought, well, if I'm not going to go, who else is? I'm being called, right, to holiness, and that means I make a sacrifice to take my kids to daily Mass. And I hadn't been. But here at daily Mass, I hear Father Umberto at the very beginning preaching, and he says, we must come to eat here, because if we don't, we will not have strength for the journey. We will not be sustained. And this spoke really deeply to me, because I hadn't been making daily Mass a priority, especially in the summer with kids. And I thought, oh yeah, of course, like, we're not going to be sustained on this journey without the Lord. Like, we can't do this alone, right? And also, just to share that, with all the different crises that the church has gone through, scandals, heresies, that maybe you can see that have come from, like, the top, right? The top of the church. Some of it is, most heresies are coming from, like, high-ranking members of the church at times. But where does the church, where is it reborn? And it's from the bottom. It's from the poor. It's from the weak. It's from the meek, the lowly. And that, I think, can speak to us really profoundly as Emmanuel, because we feel very poor at times, right? And Pierre was very poor at times, all the time, actually. And so that is encouraging to know that we can actually make a big difference in the history of the church.
So I think one of the things, so, how can we do this as a community? And we look to the handbook again. So Jacqueline talked about, daily mass, if we can, a prayer of praise every day. And really to make it a point, how hard it may be, even with family schedules, to adore. If it's even just stopping in for 10 minutes on a daily basis, but to make it happen, because it's going to transform your life. It really will. And the Lord wants to give you something, and through the wisdom of the community and the church, that it's going to hurt. And I remember earlier this week we remembered Mother Teresa. Sorry. One of her phrases was, "In order to truly love, it hurts. To truly love, it hurts." So, and I think that's true. If we really truly love the Lord and we love our brothers and sisters, and we know that that's going to feed us, that some of these tasks are going to hurt. That it's not going to be easy to praise every day, to adore, to go to Mass. It's not going to feel good all the time, but we're called to it because there's a mystery, there's a beauty behind it. So just to remember that love hurts. True love, to choose the good for the other, it hurts at times. Not that it's going to hurt all the time, but it does, and it will. So to remember that when you're coming to Mass and it's like, well, maybe I'm going to be 5 minutes late, or I have all the kids, they're screaming. That hurts, but you're passing something to them, and the Lord's, in return, passing something to you. So I think to really, this year, to really make a conscious effort to act in that way. Someone told me that if you really want to change something, you have to act, obviously, in a different way. So even today, we're so ingrained in what we do. We go home, we take the same road, every day, maybe from church or from work. Do it a different way. Start going a little bit different way, just to change your mindset, to know that I'm going to make some changes in my life so that the world doesn't look the same. So maybe you're not stuck in the same rut that you normally are. But really to try to make a conscious effort to do those things this year. And I really think it's going to transform your life in this community. And that's really what Pierre is asking and has asked, to make that sacrifice. And he did it. I mean, he switched jobs so that he could pray and adore. And I think we're called to do the same thing, maybe not in as dramatic a way, but to really make those things happen. Because otherwise, holiness doesn't come from mediocrity. It really comes from choosing to love when it hurts.
Right, and so if we look to what we're being asked, right, by the bishops of the church to dig in, to have this call to holiness, so how does that fit into with Emmanuel, right? What does it mean to be Emmanuel, God with us here in the world and for the church? And really, it's so beautiful that we have a path to holiness that we can offer ourselves, our brothers and sisters, to really concretely, it's what we're being asked to do in Emmanuel is exactly what the church is being asked to do, kind of in a new way, in a more devout way. And it's something that we're asked as a community to live just regularly. It's what we live regularly. So Emmanuel, it's a community, we are a community of life. We are called to live together, to serve with one another, to serve the Lord. So really a call to holiness and a call to service. And it's really fully described in our name, God with us, living in union with God. It's important also to know with Emmanuel that we are in the world. We don't set ourselves out. We don't remove ourselves from even positions in work, the workplace, or schools, or whatever it may be. We are in it. So we're not of the world, but we are in the world, so we can be that light that the church needs, that the Lord needs us to be for all of those around us.
And just quickly, that comes straight from Pierre. that he chose, the Lord chose for him. He discerned not to be a priest. He had health problems. He had to help his mother when she was sick as well. But many priests, why don't you become a priest? And he discerned, through that, that the Lord wasn't calling him to that. He was called to be a consecrated lay man, to live in the world, to adore, but to bring that to all those that he encountered on a normal daily basis throughout his day.
Right, and he kind of recognized the call we could maybe say that came from also what Vatican II was asking for the lay vocation to become, which was this to live in the world and to sanctify it by our holiness, by our activities that we sanctify the world. And really, first and foremost, it is today as it was at the beginning of the community, and what Pierre wanted was our own. The greatest desire for the community is our own personal sanctification. So that's what we're working on. And without that, we actually cannot help our brothers and sisters. So just kind of, we'll probably remind all of us of that through this year, but really that is the number one goal here, is our own personal sanctification. And the community has a path, right? So we have this daily, we're going to talk more about the routine of the life of the community. Daily, that's called to, as whatever the long time of prayer means for you, it's a long time of prayer. If you can pop into adoration, you're going to adoration. If you can get to daily mass, you organize your calendar, you organize your schedule around daily mass, right? So we have these daily routines. Our sanctification journal, so we can understand what the Lord's saying to us. We have weekly routine, which is our household, which is really the heartbeat of the community. We have our monthly gatherings, which is today. And so that's how we can be holy. That's what the community is offering to us. And if we do that, if we commit to it, it will happen. We will change.
And then, so one of the other things, not to belabor this here, but so the other difference with the Emmanuel community is that we have all states of life in the community. We have priests, we have consecrated brothers, consecrated sisters, we have single people, we have married people, people that are discerning. And that was one of the other things that Pierre saw. He wanted to build a community. Because in France in 1971, he saw the church, the priests, were living apart, living separately. They weren't living in community. He wanted to create something where brother priests could live together, to challenge one another, to live life. And he saw the relationship between the lay people and the priests, that you can communicate, obviously communicate, but communicate with your lives, so that the priests can understand in a more practical way what it means to be a married couple in the church. That the couples and families can learn what it means to be a priest, and you're communicating through your lives with one another, in a very healthy way, that you're living life together through all these different states of life. And Pierre saw that as a real asset to the community and an asset to the church. So one of the other things, we talked about all these different states of life. That one of the other things that Pierre saw is that Christian families, that the community could bring them so that they pray together. There are certain times during the week that they pray. One example in Fire and Hope here, that there are different French families that maybe the youngest child of the family has the responsibility of ringing the bell, when it's time to have prayer, giving the little ones responsibility to call the family to prayer, but to make sure that we're scheduling that we're doing it, that we're setting time apart in our day to do that. And he also mentioned in Fire and Hope that it's important for the children, within a family, to see the parents separate time within the week to pray together. That they know that it's important the kids can see it's important for the mom and dad to separate time during the week to make that happen, to grow in holiness in that way as well. So anything else there? All states of life, Jacqueline?
No, it's okay. I was going to read something from there. And just given with all states of life, and to remember too that our brothers and sisters in the community have been given to us for our own sanctification, right? So it's interesting for those of you who have seen the community, kind of the bigger community, and or even just we recognize how we live here locally, that we are all so different from one another, yet we have been called to be together, to walk this path of holiness, and that to recognize that even if it's hard at times to live community life or whatever it may be, that brother or that sister has been given to you. If they have a call to Emmanuel, they've been given to you by the Lord for your own holiness. So maybe you would rather not have the greatest relationship with everybody or whatever it may be. Well, that might be too bad at times because you have been called and the Lord has something for you in each of these relationships. And just maybe that can help us recognize and love each other a little bit more to know that we've all been given to each other, brought together by Him for our sanctification. So that is a little bit about.
Yeah, just two more quick points, and maybe we've already said it a little bit, but one of the other things that Pierre hoped for is that the community would remain small in whatever that way, and maybe more in humility, that he didn't want the community to be an evangelization machine, because he saw at the end of your personal holiness, adoration, that the gift that's given to you is that you want to share it. There's a fire that burns that you want to give it to others. That he saw, evangelization as the natural outpouring of all this, prayer and relationship with the Lord. But he didn't want it to be a machine. That, just like your own friends in your life, it's not like you have this gigantic machine of friends and schedules, and it's an impersonal thing. That he knew that evangelization at the same time, just like friendships, is a very personal thing. That it's not a huge machine of, we have these huge ways to evangelize. But no, it's at a personal level, and Pierre knew that. He knew that evangelization is at the individual, personal level. And he wanted to make sure that the community understood that and that it would continue in that same way.
Right, and so for us, when we speak about the vision for the year for the community, it will always be household, always a weekly household. We will have our gatherings for the year, monthly gatherings, the second Saturday of every month. We hope to have some different missions. We're planning one in December in Delano with a procession, and Father La Liberté is welcoming us there. We'll have something bigger for Pentecost for sure. There's talks of a bigger mission at Hill Murray with the Emmanuel School of Mission in the Bronx. So there are some things that we want to do because we know that it's good to have these kind of types of activities, these compassion activities. It's really good for us. First, mission is always first for the missionary, right? So again, you've heard the call for the daily routines, the weekly routines when household comes up. But we cannot stress enough, and please know that we say this to ourselves, right? Because we get it. We get how busy life is. We get that it's hard to get to Mass and adoration. The poor people who have been in adoration with me and my children lately. We're there, and it's kind of a mess, but we're there, right? It's hard, but we cannot stress enough the power of adoration, that it might seem as a very passive activity. It is not passive. We cannot, anything we're trying to do here, our path to holiness, it has so little to do with us except for our yes, right? It has everything to do with what the Lord wants, everything to do with Him. So, and just two things on that. Our own Archbishop, he knows the community a bit and could say maybe he's a friend of the community, and he knew where the parish and the community was in Paris, and when he lived above the Centro in Rome, he knew they were Emmanuel because he saw the people coming to adore. He would see the people, and he said this to us in a meeting we had with him. People would come off the metro in Paris, and they were all coming from work, right? And they were going into this parish to adore, and he knew they were Emmanuel. That's who we need to be. That's who we are. And then just a quote from Pierre that we watched this beautiful documentary recently. Didn't know it existed. Maybe it was recently translated. I don't know. About his cause for canonization that they put together a number of years ago. But we watched it when we were preparing for this, and we wrote this down after.
Well, yeah, I will say just one of the beautiful things is that you can see Pierre and you can hear him. So I think you can understand someone more to hear him.
We'll send the
even
link.
even in French, it's so beautiful. You can't help but be touched to hear his voice.
And same with Martine. For those of you who remember when Martine came to visit us, who's the co-founders of the community, it's like, oh, she's holy. She's really holy. But this is what Pierre says, and we're almost done. The fire starts to burn with adoration. At adoration, there is such compassions for each other. This is the fire. As with the furnace bellowing, it develops on contact with others. The translation might not be great there, but so the furnace is flaming, and when it hits something else, it sets it afire, right? And if we really have this fire, we would set the whole town alight. Whatever the place, it only needs someone to love Jesus for everyone to come running. They all have a need to burn. We all have a need for that. That's it. Adore, adore, adore. Adoration, and this is in the handbook, it is the profound grace of the community. It's really, really, really what we're called to. And we're not going to be able to live out household well. We won't have anything to say. We're not going to have anything to edify our brothers and sisters if we are not spending time with the Lord. That's the whole point of this. Mission, fine, we can organize things. It is not, if we are not first adoring and spending time with the Lord, what are we going to give to people, right? Ourselves? I mean, I don't know how good that is for other people. So just that really, really we want to ask you to adore.
So, and then I guess just, moving, so the other vision for the year, again, household, as Jacqueline mentioned, that really is the place where we encounter the community. I mean, that's where community life is lived out within the household. So that's where we should be challenging our brothers and sisters to be adoring, praying, praising, challenge each other, because that's the place that it should happen, is within household. And that's where all of the things that we're talking about should be happening. So I mean, the other thing, within household, is that you're going to build that community. But the other thing is that each one of you create the community. You create it. I mean, we're just here. I mean, we're just sort of administrating, at some very, small level. She's, doing a lot more than I am. But I mean, we are in no way creating. We are not. So I mean, if there's something that you think is lacking in the community or community life itself, create it. I mean, if it's a big thing, just run it by us and make sure that we can, that if you need assistance. But I mean, each one of you, if there's something that's lacking, that you feel that it's lacking in the community or community life, maybe that's a prompting from the Holy Spirit that you need to call to action, to create something, to do something in whatever small, humble way that is. Because I mean, just practically, we can't. We can't organize everything, just, point and case.
Yes, she's going to end this. So the last thing we're going to say is that it's true. We really rely on you. We rely on our brothers and sisters for the life of the community and for our missions. We cannot do this alone. So we're so happy that you're all with us and to start this year. And we'll just end entrusting all of this to Mary, and we can move to lunch. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Pierre Rosal.
Pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah. So just to say, we'll take all that we have and we'll move out to lunch. We probably won't be coming back in the church after.